Here I'm going to conclude the graphics work. I wanted to take time to look at the performance of my system and try to improve that part, but to really do that right, I need to do more than just tweak the code and haphazardly make guesses at what might be fast. What I really need to do is take some time to develop a way to see into the performance of my system and then work from there to focus on bottlenecks. And that's all something that I should really develop step by step and not squeezed in at the end in a rush to move on. So for now, I'm going to leave that on a to-do list and hope that I get to that in a future project. I've been chipping away at the graphics since the beginning of 2022, so it's been over a year and a half now. And here at the end of the third arc of graphics work, there is a lot for me to reflect on. In the first arc of graphics work, I established my main plan for layering the graphics system. From the beginning, I intended to abstract both the OS and the graphics API. Then for the rest of that arc, I developed my OS abstraction, and along the way I wrote a concrete OpenGL and a concrete D3D layer, and they both cooperated with the OS abstraction layer. This abstraction includes functions for things like manipulating windows and things like that on a standard desktop computer. In the second arc of graphics work, I turned to developing my renderer, which is the graphics API abstraction. The design style I chose for my renderer is not to recreate a fully general 3D API with abstracted ideas like an abstract vertex buffer and abstracted textures and abstracted shaders. The design I chose instead was to pick a set of render features based on what sort of graphics applications I intend to create, and have the backend reduce those high-level features straight onto the graphics API underneath. I presented the basic idea of a single shader quad-based renderer, and that works pretty well for GUI applications, which is the main thing I want to get to in the short term. And I developed a font baker and some text rendering capabilities in this arc as well. Now, by the end of the second arc, I was expecting to be done with graphics, but I hit an anti-aliasing issue with my renderer while I was using it to investigate some frame time questions. It wasn't just a small issue either. I had rendered shapes that were completely disappearing between the pixels, and I had rectangles that were snapping to pixel alignments while they moved and looking clearly jittery. So I decided it was time to finally go back and do something I've always wanted to do, which is to get serious about understanding how to do good graphics programming. That was the idea of the third arc of graphics work. For most of the arc, I isolated myself from my main code in order to create a small, lightweight sandbox where I could play with graphics programming and learn the topic in a lot more detail than I have before. In some ways, I did succeed at that goal. I feel much more confident now about how geometry relates to pixel centers, how pixel centers relate to interpolated fragment values, and various ways that aliasing can occur and the various techniques that try to address it. I learned what sRGB and linear colors really entail and how to incorporate them through a graphics system, and how well the sign distance function actually approximates pixel coverage. However, looking back, I feel that there's been something slightly busted about the workflow I've been using for this third arc. At this point, my Scratch program is so complicated that it's no longer a really useful way to isolate questions and get answers, and I've started punting once again on getting answers to further questions as they come up. Much of that issue may be because of the C/OpenGL ecosystem, which has really poor iteration and organization tools built into it, and there's no clean built-in features for gathering information back and comparing results from experiments either. In the future, to develop my understanding of graphics programming, I think I want to try to rely on a different environment that's going to offer a better iterative workflow for experimentation. So instead of working in a Scratch program and then transplanting those ideas into another program, I might work in a completely different environment, maybe one that still lets me write GLSL, but something like a shader toy or something along those lines that would allow me to iterate much more rapidly on my understanding and experimentation and see the results of those things more quickly, and then the transplantation wouldn't be about taking old code that I have sitting in one program and taking it to another, but a little bit more heavyweight because I wouldn't have all of the OpenGL code, just the GLSL code. But I think a lot of my questions could be answered in a more iterative, fast-flowing environment like that. And then I would not need to constantly re-clean up my Scratch space over and over again, because those tools tend to have better ways of organizing those small experiments over time. Despite that flaw in my approach, I think these arcs have mostly been a success. The design for an abstracted OS and abstracted graphics API is working basically the way I was hoping it would, and it feels very well organized and manageable thanks to the new detailed layering discipline that I've introduced in this arc. The features for GUI construction are all there and structured in a useful way so that I will feel comfortable building a GUI on top of them in the future, and the places where the system can still be improved in the future are quite clear and feel like they've been commented and documented pretty well in the code. That's about everything that I can think of to comment on about what happened and how it went. With that, I think it's time to conclude the graphics work.